Food for the European medievals was not so very different from what we eat today. Meats like beef, pork, lamb and venison were available, along with fruits and vegetables, dairy products, eggs, fish, bread and ale. Those who could afford it might enjoy the delights of imported foods such as pomegranates, sweet Mediterranean wines, and expensive spices from the Middle East, such as cinnamon and ginger. Sugar, which was also classed as a spice, was imported from as early as the 12th century and was very expensive. So what about the peasants who lived out in the countryside? What did they eat? Or the poorer people in the towns and cities? And what about the rich nobles and royal courtiers? What sort of fare were they scoffing and quaffing? Let's travel back to the Middle Ages and find out, but please take warning, there won't be any tomatoes, potatoes or chocolate. If you find that offensive or upsetting, it's better to leave now. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Breaking the fast. Breakfast wasn't really a thing until the mid-13th century, and only 2 meals a day were eaten, whether people were toiling in the fields, crafting in a workshop, writing in the monastic scriptorium, or flouncing around at court. In medieval Europe, only 2 formal meals were eaten each day, as the Catholic Church considered that to be enough. Gluttony and any other indulgences were frowned upon, and fasting and temperance were the custom, so eating breakfast was regarded as sinful. Dinner, the first meal of the day, was the main meal and was probably eaten around late morning. The meal required a lot of preparation, especially in wealthy households, so it wouldn't have been served much earlier than the 6th hour of the day, which was noon. By that point, half of the day's work was more than likely completed. At the end of the day's activities, another lighter meal would be eaten, probably after dusk, around 6 to 8 hours after dinner. Rear supper, or rear supper, a meal served later in the evening, usually with a liberal amount of wine, was also disapproved of. The teachings of John of Milan from the Schola Medica of Salerno, the first and most important medical school of its time, founded in the 9th century, advised the following: rise at 5, dine at 9, sup at 5, retire at 9, for a long life. As meals became more complicated, dinner got pushed back even further, so diners might not eat their first meal until past noon, meaning that supper would be delayed too, possibly until after the valuable daylight had passed. So it became accepted practice to break the overnight fast with the indulgence of a small light meal sometime before dinner. For the peasant, the dish that many now considered to be the most important meal of the day would likely be some watered-down ale and a chunk of rye bread, perhaps if they're lucky a piece of cheese. Any fish fillets, be they trout, salmon or herring, were almost always smoked for preservation and were also nibbled on in the morning, giving rise to the British breakfast food of kippers. Eating breakfast was associated with the poor because only the peasant farmers and manual workers needed the energy to get through to dinner. Similarly, the very young, very old, and infirm would have increased their food intake in the morning by eating gruel. Evacuate after eating. By the end of the Middle Ages, many physicians still considered it unhealthy to eat breakfast because it was believed that a meal should never be eaten until the last one had been digested. It usually takes around 6 hours for the food to be processed and the nutrients to be dispersed. Sleeping overnight should easily be enough time for digestion to take place, right? Well, no, because physicians believed that another meal shouldn't be eaten until after digestion, and the body's passages had been cleaned out. It wasn't until the mid-16th century that physicians begrudgingly began to approve of breakfast. British MP Sir Thomas Wingfield believed that breakfast was essential in thy's realm, even though Galen never ate breakfast, Galen being the 1st century Greek physician whose views dominated Western medieval medicine. And the Tudor physician Thomas Cogan concluded that, quote, "To suffer hunger long filleth the stomach with ill humours." Cogan went on to disclose that the English often ate 3 meals a day and believed that it was fine until the age of around 40, but then the digestive system became too weak to handle breakfast. He also added that the brown bread and butter of a countryman's breakfast was much better than the fine white bread known as manchet, which was eaten by the wealthy because that caused constipation. Noble men, Cogan said, also liked to start the day off with toast dipped into a draught of strong wine. Alcohol must have been an early morning thing with the wealthy medievals, and it seems that being away on pilgrimage gave them a pass when it came to eating breakfast. In 1255, the English King Henry III had 6 tons of wine delivered to the Cathedral of St. Albans for breakfast whilst he was visiting there. That is 1,500 gallons of wine. It was probably to make sure that the king and his entourage only drank the best wine whilst they were on their journey, as shops and inns along the way would be hit and miss regarding the quality of their vino. Still, if the king was to go against the teachings of the church by having breakfast, he may as well have a little tipple whilst doing it. Take what you can get. Seeing as it was the countryside peasants who produced most of the food available in the Middle Ages, it is to be expected that they also ate quite a lot of it themselves. It meant that they usually had enough to eat, except in times of famine. Carbohydrates came in the form of grains, mostly wheat, rye, oats, and barley, and were either baked into bread or brewed into ale. Some fruits and vegetables, such as apples, pears, onions, and beans, were grown, and wild fruits and nuts could be foraged from nearby woods. Many dwellings in the towns and cities had a small garden plot to grow a few veggies. Otherwise, any food would have to be bought, which is not an easy task for those with little money. In London, there were plenty of market stalls selling everything from cherries to meat pies. Cookshops were available for people to buy a ready-made meal and either eat it inside or take it away. Cows, sheep, and pigs were the 3 main sources of protein. In England, in the early 13th century, a lot of kids were also eaten. Sorry, I've just been told to clarify that that's baby goats, not baby humans. Although this trend did seem to die out. Pigs were by far the best animal to keep, as they were easier to fatten up and would eat anything. Cows produced milk, butter, cheese, and meat. Sheep, milk, cheese, and wool. In 14th century England, there were at least 8 million sheep, as that was the number of exported fleeces. Cheeses were very hard and had to be soaked before eating. Hung above the hearth, they would be continually smoked and would last for months. Cream cheeses were only served in the wealthiest of houses. Many geese and chickens were also kept, and small birds were captured and eaten. Rabbits, hares, pheasants, conies, and deer roamed around freely and would be skinned and eaten if caught, although anyone caught with any of these from a lord's land would be charged with poaching and could face serious punishment. Eating meat was not allowed during the 40 days of Lent, so fish had to be eaten then, as well as on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and the eve of important holy days. Living by the coast gave poorer people the luxury of shellfish such as oysters, cockles, mussels, and winkles. William Langland wrote the poem Piers Plowman in the 14th century. In it, he describes what food the poor man Piers had in his cottage. It included, quote, 2 green cheeses, some curds and cream, an oat cake, and 2 loaves made with bran, some beans, some parsley, a leek, and cabbage. He has no salt meat, no eggs, and no money to buy pullets. Langland also points out that other poor people don't even have bread or penny ale in winter, and because cold meat and fish were such a luxury, they ate vegetable broth and drank water. Sweet and spicy. The 13th century English knight and poet Walter of Bibsworth describes what he saw as a typical meal. Quote, "A fashionable yeoman who came from a great banquet has told us about the feast, how their service was ordered. Without bread and wine and ale, no one at a feast will be at ease, but naught but all 3 was set out there. But at least we were told about the serving they brought in first. A boar's head larded with the snout well garlanded, and venison with fermenty, a porridge of boiled grain, then a variety of other foods, cranes, peacocks and swans, kids, pigs and hens. Then they had rabbits in gravy all coated with sugar. Viand de Cypre, cold chicken mincemeat flavoured strongly with ginger, and mormony, a sweet meat stew, and all you could want of red and white wine, and then another lot of roasts all alongside the other, pheasants, woodcocks and partridges, thrush, larks and roast plovers, blackbirds, woodcocks and throstles, and other birds I cannot name. Brawn, a meat jelly, crepes, and fried dishes tempered with rose sugar. And when the table was taken down, sweet spice powder with coarse dragées, sugar plums, candied mace, cubeb, a valuable spice, clove, and many other candies. And lots of wafers. The meal was only typical if you hung around in wealthy circles though. We can't really see Joe Bloggs, the peasant farmer from the village, sitting down to eat all that. There wasn't just a demand for spices during the Middle Ages, there was a craving for them, and they were even more expensive than meat. From 1431 to 32, the household accounts of the Earl of Oxford show that a whole pig could be bought for the price of a pound of pepper, and pepper was the cheapest spice to buy. The steward of the Talbot family in Shropshire kept accounts of expenditure for the household from 1431 to 32. The family ate 14 pounds of ginger and 17 pounds of pepper, along with another 17 pounds of other spices, 3 of which were saffron, which was obscenely expensive. Much of the same. Several English manuscripts on cookery have pages on elaborate feasts like the banquets held in honour of Lord de Grey, feasts for various bishops of the coronation banquet of King Henry IV. The coronation meal was typical of many wealthy feasts during the Middle Ages. There were 3 courses, which consisted of 43 dishes. During the first, there were large joints of meat, pheasants, a boar's head, and Lombardy custard made with prunes, dates, and bone marrow. There were huge pies, a stuffed piglet, venison, and fermenti for the second course, and rabbits, partridge, and blansaw, a white soup, for the third. Every course ended with a subtlety, also called entremets, meaning between serving. Subtleties were elaborate edible works of art made with food. They were often made with marzipan or sugar paste and would take the form of a castle, a mythical creature, or a scene from a story. It should be noted that these sorts of banquets might not happen daily, but the food provided at them was the sort prepared by the cook every day in the household of an aristocrat. Perhaps this was what Sir Walter of Bibsworth meant when he described a banquet as a typical meal. It was, in essence, at least for the wealthy, a lot of normal dinner dishes, just in greater quantities. Really, just more of the same. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed the video, as we do release a new one every Friday. Until next time, hope everyone has an amazing week. Cheers!